Hello, everyone. Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Azure Cloud Security Meetup. So this is our very first meetup for this year, 2023. Ibrahim, how have you been? How have you been?
Hello, I'm fine, David. And you?
Yeah,
I know you are
busy.
busy, but
It's crazy busy. It's the only one word, busy. But you know that's how it goes, right? In sort of like the areas that we work in. So
yes.
yeah, so it's another year to get on with a lot of Azure security, right?
Happy New Year for everyone. Then.
Yeah, yeah, same, same. Happy New Year to everyone. So, okay. So, before we get into our very first session of the year, so I'm really, really looking forward to this session. I'll tell you why, Ibrahima. So, um, I was doing some research on some work that I was putting together, right? And as I was doing the research, I started looking at like areas where there could be areas of vulnerability in a full like software supply chain, right? And then like the area of extensions, right, was coming up in some of the research, and I thought, oh, okay, let me Google and search for more information, and I found an amazing research that's been done by a speaker today. So I found an amazing research from JC, where what he actually did was he took a bunch of Azure exceptions and he did some analysis on them and found significant vulnerabilities in a lot of them. And JC is also like an
Awesome.
Azure, yeah, and it's like just very amazing number in terms of what he was able to find. So then we connected with JC, and thankfully he agreed to come speak with us today. So this session is going to be
So
amazing.
we will have fun then.
Yeah, exactly. It is going to be amazing. It's going to be amazing because one area of security that you hear brought up more often these days is you hear the area of supply chain security, right? The software supply chain needs to be secure, and this is a critical aspect of it. And I'm looking forward to hearing from Jesse. So, just to mention to everyone watching us, everyone joining, do not just watch and join, participate. If you have any questions relating to the areas that Jason is going to be covering today, and maybe even relating to the area that Jason is not going to be covering, feel free to throw your questions at him. We'll help you. We'll help you pass the question to him. But for now, let's go ahead and bring up Jesse. Hello, Jesse. How you doing?
Hello, welcome, David.
Yeah.
It's good to be here. It's
Yeah,
fun.
nice to have you here. Again, like Just looking at the research that you did again, and how just very interesting, and I like the way that you broke things down into details in terms of not just here's what I found, but hey, if you're responsible for writing extensions, here's what you can do to make things better. Microsoft, hey, what are you doing? Here's what you can do to make things better. Here's what you can do to make things better. And then, hey, to the pipeline administrators, here's what you can do to make things better also. So that's very,
Yeah.
very, very, very interesting. Awesome. So without any further ado, I think Ibrahim and myself will get out of the way and then we'll let you go. If anybody has any questions, put your questions in the chat window and we'll pass them to JC. So over to you, JC.
All right, perfect. So thank you very much for having me. Let me quickly share and start this whole thing up. All right. So we went a couple of times back and forth on a title, and then we ended up with trusting the unknown and then ensuring safe and secure extensions for your CICD workflows. And unfortunately, I found out that that's really hard. So
and by the way, sorry to interject, Jesse. By the way, that title was generated by ChatGPT. The title was generated by ChatGPT. So I took your description, fed it to ChatGPT, and said, generate some titles for me, and then it came up with that title.
Yeah, it's good stuff. So let's just get to let's just cut to the chase. I found that 40% of the extensions that also the ones that I'm using contain some vulnerabilities. And so this happened when we had a innovation day over at Xperit where I work. And so we get together every 2 months, and you can work on whatever you want, wherever you want, with whomever you want. And basically, I took some of the research that my colleague Rob did, and he's coming to the podcast later. I think he's in 4 sessions or something. And so he completely butchered the whole GitHub Actions marketplace. And he basically did that for a client that he's working for that wants their GitHub Actions workflows to be secure. And I was like, well, Rob, you started with all of this because when you and I talked about this like 3 years ago, I always had the idea that I should be looking into these things, but then I never got to it. And then so Rob did, but Rob didn't do it in Azure DevOps, but he did it in GitHub Actions. And I was like, well, now that we figured out how to do this, we should actually also kind of run this through the Azure Pipelines marketplace. And so that's kind of how we started. And so within 8 hours, we had cobbled together a bunch of scripts that did some crazy things. But before I get to that, people said, well, 40%, well, but if I look at the marketplace, there are 2,000 extensions on there, but a lot of them are just published by somebody we don't know. So maybe it's just that 40% of the bad extensions are just made by somebody trying to learn TypeScript or something like that. It turned out that wasn't the case. So 21% of the extensions owned by Microsoft, and there's a list of extension publishers that I've gathered under Microsoft, contain vulnerabilities. So I kind of went looking forward, like, are there maybe other slices that I could make through the marketplace to figure out what is secure? Anything with a 1-star rating or up, still 38%. Doesn't matter if it's 5%, if it's a 5-star rating or a 4-star rating or a 3-star rating. Ratings have nothing to do with security. Actually, there are more secure extensions that don't have a rating than there are extensions that don't have a rating. So that was interesting too. So people said, well, but if people update these extensions regularly, that must be better. So I sliced and diced the data again. And so of the extensions updated in the last 3 months, 39% still vulnerable. So that 1% is not making any change. And so and another way to slice and dice is by the kind of task. So there's different kinds of ways that tasks can be registered inside of Azure Pipelines. One of them is Node. The other one is TypeScript. And it turns out all of the extensions I found are in Node-based extensions. Now, this is a little bit cheating. So if you've already read my blog post, I actually don't have any tools to find vulnerabilities in PowerShell. So the 0% in PowerShell, I'm not sure yet. But there is, I will get back to it. There is a couple of places where I can say, all right. So PowerShell has a couple of advantages over the way that Node-based actions are being delivered inside of GitHub Actions, Azure Pipelines. So, well, we'll get to that. So I see the links already been shared in the chat. So I kind of gathered all of this data together, including the scripts that I used to download everything from the marketplace. By the way, if you download the whole marketplace, that's about 700 gigs. And so I kind of wrote everything up that I found. And so if you really want to kind of get all of the nitty-gritty details, you can read the blog post. My blog thinks it's about half an hour read. I can read it a little bit quicker. So I also published a Git repository with all of the extension manifests and all of the code that I used to actually generate to generate this data. And so I think I've got now 10 scripts that slice and dice the data in certain ways. So if you've got another suggestion, send me a pull request with a new script, run it against the data, and we'll see what happens. But so far, I have not really found anything that helps me identify what is a secure extension and what isn't. So that's kind of an interesting one. Well, apart from downloading the extension, throwing a bunch of security scanners against it, and seeing what happens. So that's what I did. That's basically kind of the steps that we went through. So kind of a little bit about me. My name is Jesse or Jesse, kind of depending on how you want to pronounce it. And my handle is kind of consistently the same just about everywhere. As you can see, I collect stickers or things that I can teach. So I'm chief trainer at Xspirit, and I teach the Scrum curriculum from Scrum.org, the Phoenix Project game, which is an awful lot of fun. And I am a GitHub accredited trainer as well. So a little bit about my credentials and why you should or should not trust the information that I give you here today. So if you have questions, if you want to reach out, if you want to contribute to this research afterwards, here's all the data that you have to get in touch. And I kind of love to see what you are all doing with it. By the way, that whole data file of all of the stuff together, I mashed it up into one big single JSON. So if you download that, I think it's 350 megabytes at the moment. That's the snapshot of about 2 weeks ago. And then you can slice and dice the data in any way you want yourself. So that is a lot of fun too. How did I get interested in kind of this whole thing? I've been writing extensions for the Azure pipelines, and back then it was called Visual Studio Team Services, I think, or maybe even still Visual Studio Online. I'm not sure.
Apologies to interrupt,
Microsoft has renamed this thing a couple of times.
Sorry to interrupt. Sorry. I'm not sure, but is your screen changing? Have you switched the slide?
It is sharing. It says. Oh, there it is.
So yeah, it got stuck on the title page. So I guess when you were talking, I guess that you were saying something. So
yeah,
I think I'll move it to the background. Yeah. So it just got stuck on the title place. Oh, okay. Yeah, I think it's changed now. Awesome.
It changes.
So that was the one that we missed. Okay.
But now it doesn't change.
Oh no. Yeah. So yeah, it came up with the slide, and then it just stayed, and then it didn't switch to another slide when you switched.
I just switched, but there it is. All right. So I have a whole bunch of extensions in the Azure DevOps marketplace, and some of these have been as old as the Azure DevOps marketplace, and I've got a couple of ones that are even deprecated and are no longer there. But and I try to keep all of these up to date, which is actually quite a bit of work. Sometimes it's 30, 40 kind of automatically nowadays generated pull requests on a monthly basis to kind of go through and to stay up to date. So I can imagine why people don't really want to do it, because it's not the most fun work in the world. But yeah, I've got my name on it. It's on the public marketplace, so I want it to stay secure. Let's see if we can get this. Yep, there it goes. If I move my mouse after I change the screen, it changes. Funny. I also am the maintainer of the Azure DevOps extension tasks. And so today, 7,000 installs exactly. So really happy with that. And so this is a set of extensions that helps people publish their extensions through a continuous integration delivery pipeline. And I think that that's a great way to do that, because the easier you make it to ship your updates, the less work it is to keep things up to date, and it becomes easier to just make sure that everybody that relies on you also stays secure. Let's go back one slide. And so let's look, for example, at my variable toolbox right here. There. Got about 7,500 installations. So that's an extension that has been installed in more than 7,000 Azure DevOps organizations worldwide. And some of these organizations are really big. You might ask, how do I know? Well, I broke it once, accidentally. And the next morning when I woke up, I had a GitHub issue tracker that was completely full of people that really were angry with me because I broke their extension. I broke their pipelines. And in one big bank in the United States, my little mistake had broken 15,000 deployments that night. Well, it's important that these extensions actually work, but it's interesting to kind of see how they get delivered. So let's quickly look at what's inside one of these extensions. Oh. Yeah. All right. So what is an extension? Well, an extension is really nothing more than a zip file with a bunch of stuff in it that you publish to the Azure DevOps Marketplace. And then when people install it, the contents of that stuff gets copied over to their Azure DevOps instance, their organization, and is basically copied into the database. And each task becomes what is called a task zip. So every version of every task is a little zip file that's stored inside of the content table of Azure DevOps. And if you're using Azure DevOps Server, it's stored in your Azure DevOps project collection. And every task zip is something that can run. And so an extension can contain one or more of these task zips. They're extracted actually, or they're not a zip when they're in the extension, but just a big folder full of files. And then there's an extension manifest that says, in this extension, you find this, and this extension build task, or a tab inside of Azure DevOps, or a context menu extension, or something else. And then with that, there are some marketplace pretties. So I tend to call them. So it's the icon, the screenshots, the text that you see when you click on the marketplace, the license agreement that people agree to. And in all of my extensions, it's an MIT license, which basically says, do with it what you want. It comes with 0 warranty. So it's interesting that a big American bank relies on something like that to to deploy 15,000 deployments every night with 0 warranty. It's interesting. So if we then kind of go one step deeper, what is a task? So this is kind of in that folder of the build tasks and then publish extension and then v2 in this case. There's multiple versions of each task inside of this extension. And what you will see is that there's a node modules folder. Now this is where the problem starts. So that node modules folder, in this case, you can see is about 10 megabytes of stuff. And the 10 megabytes of stuff is all that I need to be able to publish an extension. And this extension doesn't do a lot. It extracts a zip file, it reads an XML file, it reads a JSON file, and that's basically it. So in order for me to do that, I include about 10 megabytes of JavaScript stuff inside of this zip. And so that's also what gets copied into the database, and that's also what runs on your agent. With that, there's some more pretties. So again, an icon. There is another manifest that explains something about the inputs of the task, which node version to run, and a couple of other things. And then the actual custom code. And so if you look at this extension or this specific task, there is about 18 kilobytes of actual code. So it's 18 kilobytes of code that I've written. And I'm not the best TypeScript programmer in the world, so there might actually be some mistakes in that extension that I created. But then there is 10 megabytes of plain text JavaScript code that's written by other people that is inside of this extension. And so you can imagine that if I do not update this regularly, that 10 megabytes of node modules will get stale quite quickly. And the older that folder becomes, the more security vulnerabilities people are going to find in those old versions that we package along with those tasks. So yeah, it's one of the interesting problems with the whole node ecosystem, but it's also kind of interesting that Microsoft chose to kind of freeze the contents of an extension at the time of publish. So if I want to update these node modules, I'm going to have to build the extension again in my CICD pipeline, and I'm going to have to stick those node modules again into the zip, and then publish a new version and ship that to the marketplace. This extension, its zip file is 31 megabytes. Extracted, it's about 82 megabytes from the top of my head. So every time that I need to update an extension, I need to push another 80 megabytes of JavaScript into your project collection database. So I'm a little bit hesitant to kind of include everything all at once, but I do have to push a new version on a very regular basis. The other thing that happens is every time I publish a new version, I must change the version number. And therefore, kind of depending on how you are referencing your tasks, you might have to change your version number. So it's fun too. If you look at a PowerShell task, you can immediately already see kind of a big difference. There's no node modules folder. There's a PS modules folder. It's only 600 kilobytes. And that is, well, and so the attack surface of the PowerShell module is a lot smaller than the attack surface of kind of a very simple, relatively simple JavaScript task. Other than that, it's pretty much the same. There's a bit of a custom code. In this case, it's 11 kilobytes. There's the same manifest file. In this case, it says go run some PowerShell, and there is an icon. So these are kind of the major two flavors that you see in these tasks, but it gives you kind of an idea of what gets shipped to the marketplace, and then what gets shipped from the marketplace to your Azure DevOps instance. And then when your pipeline runs, that same zip file is just copied over to the agent, extracted, and then whatever script file it finds in there, it runs it. And most people install their Azure Pipelines agent as admin because it needs to install things, right? So usually we're running a script with pretty high privileges that somebody published into the Azure DevOps Marketplace, and that gets updated usually within 10 seconds after me publishing inside of your Azure DevOps database, and then whatever next pipeline runs my latest version of that script. You can imagine that there might be some security issues with that setup. So just a little kind of side note, an extension can contain multiple tasks. So it can have task A and task B. In my extensions, I have multiple tasks. Some extensions carry 7 or 8 tasks. And then for each major version that I publish, I can actually contain multiple major versions in a single extension. So for some of my extensions, I have an older version that targets Azure DevOps Server and Team Foundation Server, 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020. And then I've got the newest version, which targets Azure DevOps Server 2022. But I just all package them in a single extension because that makes it a lot easier for people to perform a server upgrade or do other things. So you can imagine that there is actually quite a bit of code that's get packaged in such an extension. So in the case of the Azure DevOps Marketplace extension, about 80 megs of code in total across 7 extensions across 2 different versions for each task. So it's interesting to know how that pans out. All right. So where do these tasks come from? Some of them are built in. So the built-in tasks are shipped by Microsoft basically on a 3-week cadence. Every 3 weeks there's a new sprint. Microsoft takes a new copy of all of their tasks in the Azure Pipelines tasks repository. And then anytime that they change something during that sprint, it's usually hot fixing, they will also ship that. And those first get shipped to Brazil, if I'm not mistaken. So the instance of Azure DevOps in Brazil is the first one to receive most updates. And then it kind of cascades that to all of the different regions. And then Asia Pacific is about the latest one, the last one to receive the updates. And there can be about 6 weeks to 12 weeks between the first one rolling out and the last one rolling out. So it's kind of interesting. If you are on Azure DevOps Server, you don't get any of that. So only the built-in tasks are updated every time that you install a Microsoft update pack, like a 2020.1, 2020.2, that might contain newer versions of the tasks. So I worked around that a little bit. So it's one of my pet projects. But Azure DevOps Server basically has all of the versions of the task that they had when that version of the server got shipped. So if you are still running Team Foundation Server 2018, you have the version of the tasks that shipped in 2018. And you have all of the security vulnerabilities that were found between 2018 and now. So when we get to the recommendations, one of them is upgrade. There is a way for an administrator to sideload these, but we'll get that at the bottom. So the alternative is that they're from an extension from the public marketplace. So like I showed you, I have 7 extensions in the public marketplace. You can install them from the public marketplace, and then there is a link created basically between the public marketplace and Azure DevOps server or Azure DevOps in the marketplace. And every time that I publish a new version of my extension, within a couple of minutes, you have that copy of the extension. And if I didn't change the major version number, your pipelines will magically start using whatever the new version is that I just published. So that's one way of doing it. The alternative is that they're from a private marketplace. So private marketplaces only really exist for Azure DevOps Server, but then you have to download the v6 file, that zip file from somewhere, and then manually upload it to your server. And the moment that you upload it, kind of basically the same thing happens, and all of the collections in your server will start using the new version that becomes available. Then there's one final way of pushing an extension into Azure DevOps or Azure DevOps Server, and that's basically the way that this happened in 2015 when the marketplace didn't exist yet. And that is just to take a zip file of just a single task and telling the server, force install this task into the server. And then there's no connection with an extension. There's no way to see basically in the UI even where that came from. But Azure DevOps will then happily start using that task, which if somebody has enough permissions to do that, is a really interesting way to kind of break somebody's CICD pipeline. But okay, I digress a little bit. So there's 2 problems with these tasks. The first is that by default, the agent pins the version of the task to the major version that you've selected. So if you have your YAML file, it usually says no tool add 1. Well, it will always use the latest, the major version 1, and it will also, if version 2 comes out, it will not automatically upgrade you to version 2. And if you're using YAML, there is nowhere in the UI that you can even see that version 2 is available. So that's a lot of fun. And the second way that updates happen is that minor version updates automatically roll out. So when I publish a new minor update, you will use the latest minor update by default. If you're using Azure Pipelines YAML, you can pin to a specific version, but nobody does that. So kind of the assumption is most people automatically update to the latest version. And so if I break something, it's gone. And so I've actually written a big blog post about kind of the ways that you can fix this, because 2 weeks ago, Microsoft actually broke the npm authenticate task and it took them a couple of days to actually get that fixed. And so everybody that was using the npm authenticate task on a self-hosted runner could not get their stuff deployed if they were using UI-based build or UI-based releases. If you were using a YAML file, you could actually tell it to use the previous version by hard coding the exact version that you wanted. And so that was actually quite a useful thing to do. Let's make sure that that actually shows. So, come on. Yep, there it is. It's interesting how that works. And so you can find this blog post on my blog. But one of the ways to do that is to actually put the exact version number in your YAML files. But now every time that I push an update, you have to change a YAML file. So there is additional work coming in with that. And how do you know which YAML files to update and when? That kind of becomes a different kind of problem. All right. So how do you know whether or not you can even trust these tasks? And how do you know that you can trust these updates? And as you've probably already concluded, it's pretty hard. So I downloaded 700 gigabytes of v6 files. That's all of the v6 files that were ever published to the public marketplace. And I extracted them and I scanned them. And that's how I came to the conclusion that 40% of them I really should not trust. But then I looked at, can I figure out any way to detect that from the outside? And so I looked at, does it make a difference if it's a trusted publisher? Nope. Does it make a difference if there's domain validation for the publisher? It shows a nice blue ribbon and a check mark. Nope. Does the rating matter? Nope. 5-star ratings have just as many security vulnerabilities as 1-star ratings. Number of open issues or pull requests. It says something about how actively the author engages with the community. but it does not say anything about the security of the extension. It also requires the author to put metadata inside of that extension. So if the author didn't put the GitHub repository of their extension in the manifest file, then you can't even see the number of issues and pull requests. So I do see that it's kind of a level. All of these things, they should indicate some level of trust, or at least some level of, if there is an issue, is there a way that I can find the author and fix things? But it still doesn't say anything about whether or not it works. So people said, well, recently updated. If people update the extension very recently, that should be good. So I looked at that, and in the week that I checked, 35% of all of the extensions that were updated that week were vulnerable. And that was just about the same number as that we're seeing for all of the normal extensions. So the fact that people are releasing an update is not a guarantee that they're actually fixing the dependency problems and the security vulnerabilities that they have in their pipelines. Probably they just don't have those tools turned on. So, but there's no way that I can see that in the marketplace. Looks nice is really difficult because I can't kind of technically see whether or not an extension looks nice by looking at 300 megs of JSON. But I do feel that the people who do spend more effort on writing good documentation, proper README and stuff like that, probably care more about the contents of their extension. I don't know. I have no idea. So, and then some people ask, is it really that bad? And well, maybe not. So I'll show you how bad is, but maybe not, because all of these things that I found are still potential security vulnerabilities. I haven't actually gone that deep to figure out if there is an exploit chain that you can use to actually get this done. But if you look at the vulnerabilities, it's actually quite interesting. It's still not pretty. If you look at the list, so this is the output. So on the left, you will see a list of things found by SNCC code. So that's a security analysis tool that scans the code. And you see things like, I'm not handling the transition from HTTP to HTTPS correctly, or I'm actually turning off the TLS configuration for Node completely. And I'm using something like Encrypto, but I'm actually not using crypto correctly. So there was one task that stores secrets on disk, but basically uses the crypto so badly that anybody can decrypt it without too much problem. And the interesting ones are at the bottom is the zip slip that will allow you to overwrite an arbitrary file on disk by extracting a specially crafted zip file. And you see that here on the right as well. So there's 3 extensions that have that in the actual extension code. And then there were 78 extensions that have that problem in the dependencies that they carry. And so looking on the right, these are problems in dependencies. So regular expression denial of service, probably not that bad for a pipeline extension. But on the other hand, if somebody is in your environment and is trying to hack you and is able to completely stall your build pipelines by triggering such a denial of service and basically making all your builds hold for an indefinite amount of time, getting your security fix out is going to be quite hard. So it's really difficult to figure out kind of what's really a problem and what's really not a problem. And I basically do not want to review all of my extensions in such depth. I just don't want these problems to be there. So there are extensions, notably mine, because I've taken quite a bit of effort, have a 0 on both lists here. 0 coding vulnerabilities in their code and 0 vulnerabilities in their dependency. So it is actually possible. And so that's probably kind of the best way to know that the code can reasonably be trusted. So what's the risk we're running? Well, let's say somebody turns off TLS security. I can now basically download files from anywhere because the system is not really going to check whether or not the security handshake even did anything. I might be using your zip slip thing to overwrite a file on the drive of the build agent, or to put a file on a specific place on the drive of the build agent. That might actually be like a target file in the MS build folder. If I put a target file in the right place in the MS build folder, it will get loaded every time a little bit of .NET code builds. So that might actually also influence future builds on that same host. There were some extensions that accidentally sent data to the outside world. I might be able to kind of sneak some secrets out that way. There are quite a few extensions that install things from npm.js, but if I've turned off node security, well, I might actually get them to install it from somewhere else. And almost nobody verifies the data that they're extracting. So if you look at the Terraform extension, for example, it downloads the Terraform binaries straight from GitHub. It's a couple of hundred megs of data that it just downloads. It extracts it, and then without verifying that the file is signed or that the file has a certain hash or anything else, it just runs it, and then you pass basically your credentials to your whole Azure subscription to it, because that's what people use Terraform usually for. So if I've got abilities to overwrite files on disk and to turn off security for specific tasks, there's some pretty interesting things that I might be able to do. And remember, these hosts usually run with pretty high levels of permissions. So I see very few people that basically run their build agents in zero permission mode, only one place on the disk that they can read and write. And so the default installation in many cases has a lot of potential, which is fun. And if you look at that scenario that I just sketched, and you go back to SolarGate from about 3 years ago, that scenario sounds an awful lot like what happened to them. Somebody breached their build server. They were able to install a persistent agent on it that started changing the source code as it was being built without having to check anything into your Git repository. And so this is why it is so important that we have a secure kind of delivery pipeline, and that these extensions are extensions that we can trust. Yet if I see the number of installations across the marketplace, some extensions have like 100,000 installations worldwide. I don't think 100,000 people are actually scanning the contents of that repository or the contents of that extension. And I know for sure that Microsoft doesn't, because the only thing Microsoft does is they run a virus scanner on it, and that's it. So there is no manual inspection like for the Apple Store or anything like that. Whatever I push, it goes from some automated scanning process and it gets deployed. But I've accidentally pushed things that trigger CodeQL rules on GitHub Advanced Security. I have in the past pushed things that contained like a personal access token for Azure DevOps. It happily accepts that. Those things do not get filtered out on the marketplace side, and so that thing just gets distributed. And it's really something to remember, because this is kind of the problem that we're potentially running into. So getting back to PowerShell, why is PowerShell better? So let me say it again. I don't know. I do not know for sure whether or not PowerShell is better, but I can reason about it a little bit. One is that the PowerShell extension, the PowerShell-based extensions, they rely on PowerShell and the .NET framework for a lot of the functionality. And those are automatically updated through Windows Update. And so it means that a lot of these features, like unpacking a zip file, connecting to the network, network security features, the way that the web client handles certain web requests, and all of those things, they are handled by default by a system that's kept up to date in the background. And so if you compare that to the way that these Node.js extensions are implemented in Azure DevOps, those are frozen in time the moment that they are created. And so those dependencies will never get updated. And so it kind of makes sense that as long as you do not pack like 700 PowerShell modules inside of your extension, that the PowerShell tasks kind of by default are a little more secure. Unfortunately, these do not run on Linux, so this is only fun for Windows only. So you might be wondering, what's Microsoft doing with this? And Microsoft's actually quite interested in fixing some of these problems. So before I blogged my blog post, I reached out to the Azure Pipelines team. A couple of ex-colleagues of mine are working on that team, so I know a few people there. And so we talked through this, and I know that a lot of the recommendations that I gave them, they're actually already working on it. So that's good. One of the things that you're seeing right now is that they're updating the node handler inside of the Azure Pipelines agent from node 6 and node 10 to node 16. And they are deprecating the node 6 and the node 10 pipeline tasks. The node 6 ones are really being deprecated at the moment, and for node 10, there is a plan to deprecate them. So they're also updating all the built-in tasks for Azure DevOps, the service. And my guess is, but I'm not sure, that they're also going to ship an update for Azure DevOps Server 2022, probably 2022.1 or 2022.2, that might contain those updated versions of those tasks. But as far as I can tell, nobody is shipping updated task versions to any Azure DevOps Server version that's older than that. I've heard zero rumors on that so far. I can't find anything in the roadmap on that topic. If you want all of your extensions to be up to date, you're going to have to upgrade your Azure DevOps Server. There's now an ability in Azure DevOps and Azure DevOps Server to turn off any Node 6 based tasks in the pipeline agent. So basically, if you do that, then these very old tasks you just can't run anymore. And if you're looking at the Azure Pipelines agent code, they're adding warnings that will tell you that you are using a version that's potentially vulnerable, but they're only looking at the node version. So they're not looking at the dependencies that you carry with your extension. They're only looking at, well, this task runs on an old version of Node. It's probably vulnerable. So, and that's probably true. So that's what Microsoft's doing. And I've also not been sitting still. So I've updated all of my extensions when the Azure Pipelines Task Clip version 4 came out in October. And I have a SNCC Dependabot and RenovateBot active on all of my repositories. So I usually know when there's a security vulnerability and I try to fix that. And I've turned on GitHub Advanced Security, which GitHub is now made available for free to any public repository on all of these repositories that contain my extension. And I fixed all of the things that it came up with. And you already know I maintain the Azure DevOps extension task. So all of these things get shipped through CICD. Basically, once I make a code change and it passes my tests, I really don't have to do anything anymore. So that's a lot better. And recently, I made a contribution to RenovateBot because after I wrote this whole blog post, I came to the conclusion, as an admin, there's really nothing you can do to keep yourself secure. And then I found that RenovateBot had already partially implemented support for Azure Pipelines. And so over the Christmas vacation, I extended that. And if you turn on RenovateBot and the experimental Azure Pipelines feature, it will now tell you to update your extensions. The other thing I've done is that I have deprecated all of the extensions that I'm no longer using. So I've got a few extensions that I don't no longer use, but you cannot delete them from the marketplace after you've once published them. You can make them invisible, but anybody that still has them installed can keep using them until they actually uninstall the extension. This is to prevent me from being able to break a lot of organizations, but at the same time, it also then prevents me from sending updates for those extensions, and the users of the extension do not know. So my recommendation is that before you unpublish your extension, you actually just break it. Or you time bomb it and say this will break in a year time, and then basically just check against today and say if it is now a year from the moment that I last published, just log an error and stop running your extension and kind of do that. And so there are a lot of extensions that have either the word deprecated or do not use or test or something else in the extension name or in the extension ID, and it is not always visible on the outside that you probably should not be using that extension. And so I highly recommend authors of extensions to kind of go through it. And similarly, if you're releasing a new major version, you can use the same kind of trick to bomb the old version. So in some of my extensions, I've gone from version 1 to version 2. I'm no longer maintaining version 1, and I've basically deleted its code and replaced it with a line that says, this thing no longer works. Updated the name of that thing to blah, 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 deprecated. And so hopefully the user of my extension will see, I should not be using this anymore. I'm hoping that they do. And so I think that all the extension authors should be doing that. They should either be going to update to the latest Node version, or they should be deprecating their extensions. There is no reason to keep an old and insecure version of an extension online on the marketplace. And it has become a lot easier. When I started out in 2017, none of these features were available, but GitHub Advanced Security is free for public repositories. SNCC is free for public repositories. Renovate Bot is free for public repositories. So all of these tools really help maintain a safe and secure open source environment, and we should be using it. So what should admins do? Admins should go through their extensions, the list of installed extensions, and turn off the ones that are insecure. And they now have ways, kind of through my report, through the JSON file, but also through the use of Renovate Bot to figure out which extensions are just way behind. We should actually turn those off. They should install Renovate Bot to also update their YAML files to always use the latest major version instead of relying on, well, maybe you're still using version 0 and version 6 has already been out. You might consider turning off Node 6 support in your server for the agent. This is kind of a big thing because it might actually break a couple of the extensions that you have installed, but it also might break some of the built-in things that you have installed. And the one thing that really helps in the mitigation of this whole thing is if you allow people to use the Microsoft hosted agent, or if you create what's called an ephemeral scale set agent in Azure DevOps or in Azure. The whole idea of a ephemeral agent is that the agent gets recycled every time that a job finishes. And so if you do that, you have a clean image every time. So even if somebody manages to inject itself into one of the pipelines, they cannot infect then the agent and then through that agent infect another pipeline. So it makes it harder for people to basically hop from one piece of your source code to another. Comes highly recommended, even though it slows down your builds a little bit. It is one of the best mitigations against pipeline problems. And so if you're using Azure DevOps Server, you must upgrade. I don't really see it if you're using Azure Pipelines and you're using an older version than 2022. Basically, you should either stop using Azure Pipelines or you should upgrade your server. If that's hard for your organization, consider migrating that thing to Azure DevOps, the service, kind of the cloud thing. And then you don't have to stay up to date because Microsoft will do that for you. If you really want to stay behind, you can use that side loading trick that I told you before to update the tasks with tasks that are newer, but that's not fully supported by Microsoft. So, and if you're using the internal marketplace, which means that you're responsible for downloading the zip files yourself and installing those, then you should actually have kind of some process in place to maybe monthly or quarterly go through all of the extensions and make sure that you are on the latest version and that you are secure. This is the trick to upload a file. So if you want to overwrite your task, basically you can use the TFX command line. There is a bit of PowerShell script that I maintain in one of my repositories as well, and then you can just overwrite the version even of a built-in task with whatever it is that you want to run. So it's also an interesting security vulnerability. People can basically replace a task with something that does something completely different, and from the outside of your Azure DevOps server, you can't see that. But if you're doing this as an admin and you've got your agent pools secured correctly, then nobody else than a project collection administrator should be able to do this. You can also forcefully delete every old version of a task. So if there is a version that's really vulnerable, then you can use the TFX build task delete call and just get rid of everything and then install the only version that you want people to use, which is the latest version. And Renovate Bot helps you with that. So link already got shared in the chat. And so as you can see right here at the bottom, Renovate is helping me tell me that there's a version 4 available now, and that I'm using right now, and that version 5 is available. And so it recommends me to do an upgrade. And so I did. You can see code got merged 3 weeks ago. The writing pipeline, what can you do? if you are writing pipelines, then first thing that you should actually consider is, do I actually need an extension? Can't I just write this in 5 lines of PowerShell or 6 lines of Bash? Is it something that I need to trust a third party for? And so, if so, just write a little bit of PowerShell. If you are not, if it's not something that you can do or that you want to maintain yourself, make sure that you always keep current. So if you're using YAML files, you can pin to the exact task version, and then you can use RenovateBot to make sure that you automatically get updates. And so that way I can't accidentally break 15,000 things all at once, and you get to pick when you want to upgrade. But that kind of makes it a very honest contract between the two of us. And so final thoughts is, what can the community do? And the one thing that I really recommend that you do, and also ask maybe your managers or the owners of your companies to do, is to look at the extensions that you rely on. So I know a bank in America uses my extension for all of their production deployments every night, but they've never sponsored me. But the one time that I did break them, they did spam my whole issue list with complaints that I broke all of their deployments. And this is an interesting problem that a lot of open source maintainers right now have, is people use the things that we give them, but they also come to rely on it in such a way that they get really angry when we accidentally break it. But the people that write these extensions are also only human. So if you find a problem in these extensions, send these a pull request. Send a pull request to an extension that you're using to help the author kind of upgrade that to Node 16. And don't just go through the motions of basically changing Node to Node 16 and then sending a pull request, but also provide them with the proof that you've tested the number of different scenarios and helped out. My guess is that most people that use an Azure DevOps Pipelines extension can either write PowerShell or Node, because it's just a programming language. So I really challenge all of you to think about these kinds of things, because it really helps us out. The other thing that you can do is to leave an honest review on the marketplace, but also update them if you find new information. So I do see a lot of people sending a 1-star review. Does not work for me. Then the author updates it, and the 1-star review stays behind. The other way around, I also see people send a 5-star review, and then basically the extension gets really crappy, but the 5-star review never gets updated. So it's really difficult right now to use the reviews as any way to know whether or not the extension makes any sense or whether or not it's anything useful. And so I'll share the presentation at the end of the session, which is about now. And so I've got links to all of these topics as well. So if you want to know more, if you want to explore a little bit further, then by all means you can find all of these things. But that's kind of the end of where what I can tell you kind of about the current state of security in the Azure DevOps Marketplace. So if there's any questions, is there any thoughts, any discussions that you'd like to have, I'll still be here for a little while. So I wonder what do you all think?
It's really awesome. the last story that you told was it's very, very interesting, and it's very typical. So where the bank relied on your extension to do all the production deployments, but essentially they didn't remember until something went wrong. Then it's about time to spam you and send all kinds of messages. So that's very interesting.
And then they can find you.
It is very interesting. So it's a very interesting one. So is this something that we've seen that we've had incidents in the past where, because it just looks to me like it's very interesting that Microsoft on the marketplace side are not really doing the vulnerability scanning, and they're not doing the secret scanning on that side. Is that something that we've actually seen a threat actor actually maybe exploit in the past to get something malicious to run in people's environment, maybe by exfiltrating credentials or doing something crazy?
Yeah, so technically that's possible. I haven't found any evidence of that. I did find a couple of personal access tokens and a couple of other secrets that got leaked.
Wow.
and those had been revoked. So somebody took action, and I do not know whether or not they took action because they found it or because Microsoft revoked them at some point. I'm not entirely sure, but also a couple of weeks ago, somebody scanned the whole PyPy Python marketplace, basically.
Yep.
The NuGet version of Python, and so they also found a gazillion security tokens, like AWS tokens and Docker tokens and a couple of others. And so through me only scanning the latest version of the extensions, I did find a set of publishing tokens for a private Docker Hub instance of a big American corp. And so I told them, and they revoked them, and so it should now all be safe. But yeah, there certainly are some interesting gems that you can find by just downloading 700 gigs of zip files. And that was the other thing I found is that there was no rate limiting whatsoever on that. So I have a really fast internet connection. So it just pulled them all down.
Wow. Wow, that's very interesting. And again, like, it's also a very interesting one to go, like, in terms of the way that people use like the extensions and the way that, because I think developers typically using the extensions don't really, security is the last thing on the mind, right? People are thinking productivity, right? What extension can make my life like sort of like easier? Not necessarily what can make what contributes more to security or any of that stuff, right? That's sort of like the farthest thing from many people's mind. Is there sort of like a process that you've seen like organizations can put in place to sort of begin to get that sort of thinking in the mind of developers as they, pick and choose like these extensions to sort of like, oh, okay, let's start putting some things in place to sort of like help you to do that, to pick the right thing from a security perspective. Yeah.
So I've tried to find ways of classifying whether or not an extension looks like a good idea, and I found it really difficult. So right now there is nothing in the marketplace metadata that screams this is secure. And at the other hand, I can also understand that Microsoft would not publish that information straight on the marketplace. If they had a big banner saying, with this extension, you can overwrite arbitrary files on anybody that uses it, then that would kind of be advertising to potential attackers to find anybody that uses that extension and basically go to the reviewers list and see, oh, somebody from this big bank uses it, and somebody from this insurance company uses it. Yeah. So there's kind of this interesting problem between we need to make people aware that there are security vulnerabilities, but also you do not really want to make it too publicly available across the globe that this is a problem, right? So and due to the automated update mechanisms that Azure DevOps has in place, it's really difficult to not automatically get an update. And so I think the one thing that you can do right now is, if you're using YAML pipelines, is that you can pin the task version. And so that way you can at least review these versions, look at the contents and say, this is a version that we trust. And then basically use Renovate to automatically update the to the next version that comes out after you've reviewed it. Yeah. And so that would actually that would actually be a process in which you have some time to review, but you can still kind of reasonably fast receive updates, and you know that what you're installing is something that's sort of trustable. Yeah. But it is still really difficult. Yeah. But all of the scripts that I use to download these zips and to do the scanning and all of that, so they're all in my Git repository. So if you just want to run like a nightly run against your Azure DevOps instance and download all your latest versions of your task and throw your virus scanner at it, that is relatively easy. And so that will probably also give you quite a bit of more security than that you have by just magically accepting whatever I push into the marketplace.
Yeah. That's awesome. So I'll also share like your GitHub repo for others, and also I've shared we've shared links to like your blog post and everything. Now, final question from me. So with all this renewed interest in supply chain security, especially like with the US government coming up to say, hey, you must publish like all this SBOM information if you're going to be supplying anything to us. Do you think that will start changing like the requirement that Microsoft makes from like open source, extension contributors like yourself, in terms of now what you now need to do to
Yeah.
going forward.
Yeah, I'm afraid it will. Well, this is basically going to show which people are just individual contributors, enthusiasts, Microsoft MVPs, contractors, people like me, and probably also like you that have contributed something to the marketplace because it helped the community.
Yeah.
But I do not have all of the resources in place to kind of do all of the code signing and I could probably figure it out, but it would raise the bar quite considerably. And so if you look at the growth of especially the GitHub Actions marketplace, it went much faster than the one for Azure Pipelines. Azure Pipelines is right now at 2,100 extensions or something like that.
Yeah.
GitHub Actions alone, and that's excluding kind of the other extensions for GitHub, is at 17,000. And so that's 17,000 in 2 years over 2,000 in 7 years.
Yeah.
So I think the bar to entry at GitHub might now actually be a little bit too low. It's a little bit too easy to get to the marketplace. There are still kind of a few things that you have to figure out to publish to the Azure DevOps marketplace, but if I have to generate an SBOM and to show basically that I've done a pull request and that somebody reviewed it, it's going to be quite hard because I'm the one pull requesting to me. I'm the one reviewing my code. So basically, that's not adding any additional security. And if somebody takes over my account, they can still publish on my behalf.
Yep.
So I think it will make it harder for individual contributors to share to the marketplace. But I do think that for the larger community, and especially for big enterprises, it is probably safer. And maybe we could go to a system where if I publish a change, one or two big corporates can review my change and they can attest to the security of my work. So that, and then it rolls out through the marketplace. Something like that I could actually see kind of happening. Because I've got 7,500 people using my extension. Probably at least one of them wants to review it and make sure that they get the latest version.
God, wow, that's very interesting, man. Jesse, thanks very, very much for taking the time to come share this with us. Again, it's just a very, very interesting, approach and perspective that you're taking to really look at things from an extension perspective. That's something that we rarely hear. So thanks very much for doing the work and appreciate that. So if I might anything that you want to add before we wrap up this session?
You all now know where my GitHub lives, so I expect a lot of pull requests. And
I'll put that in the chat window now.
And also, if this work is really valuable to people, then I would love to keep kind of working on it. But I'm doing most of the research in my spare time. So if it did really help you out, then anything you can do to show your appreciation is highly welcomed.
Awesome. So I put Jeff's link in the chat window. I also put it in the description for those that will be watching afterwards on YouTube. I'll put them also in the description. So please do to ensure that you do that. It takes a lot of effort to do this. So again, much appreciated. If I might anything that you want to add before we wrap up today's session?
No, just to thanks Jesse for this amazing session. I think we all learn a lot. Now we should have new people that contribute, because it's very hard to be to do all the security stuff. So big message to corporate also.
I'll probably be publishing quite a few blog posts on the guidance on how to deprecate an extension. That's a blog post that's somewhere in my pipeline, and so if the documentation isn't there on the Microsoft Docs site, you can probably find it on my blog right now if it has to do with publishing extensions, and so I'm adding more of those kind of topics there as well. So.
Just one last question. Do you know if Microsoft plan to do some filtering or make it hard to push anything on the marketplace?
So we have had quite a few interesting conversations, and so I'm not entirely sure what I can share and what I cannot, but I can tell you that they want a healthy ecosystem, and they do not want to have a lot of crap being pushed into all of their big enterprisey corporate users. So I feel, and that's my personal opinion, that they cannot keep a marketplace open without providing additional either visibility or security, so that people have a better understanding of what it is that they're basically installing into their treasure trove of intellectual property. So
Yeah.
Well,
Awesome.
right.
Thanks.
It's not there yet, and it's been 7 years. So that's the other side of that flip coin.
Yeah.
Make a lot of noise that you want to have it, and then maybe it'll come.
Yeah. I think the government are about to force them to with all these stuff going on. So again, thanks very much, Jason. Much appreciated. Again, everyone, if you're yet to, make sure you follow the community's meetup so you'll be notified of future events that we have to that we're going to be putting together. So for now, thanks very much, Jason. I appreciate you taking the time. So bye, everyone. See you next time. Have a lovely day, evening, afternoon, wherever you're joining us from. Bye for now.
Thanks all. Bye.